In a packed courtroom, chaos erupted when a stray dog barged in, barking loudly 3 times before sitting in the center of the room. Moments later, something happened that left everyone frozen in disbelief. What could this mysterious dog be trying to reveal? The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case of the year unfolded, a high-stakes legal battle that had gripped the town for weeks. Every seat was taken, with reporters scribbling notes and spectators leaning forward, eager to catch every word. Judge Martha Campbell, a seasoned magistrate known for her no-nonsense demeanor, sat at the bench, her gavel ready to maintain order. The defendant, a prominent businessman accused of embezzlement, sat stone-faced, flanked by his legal team. Across from him, the prosecution prepared to present its final argument. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors creaked open. At first, no one noticed, but a soft padding of paws across the tiled floor soon caught the room's attention. Gasps rippled through the audience as a stray dog, matted and thin, trotted into the courtroom. The dog's coat was dusty, and its ribs were faintly visible, yet there was an unmistakable confidence in its steps. It stopped in the middle of the room and looked around as if scanning the faces. The room fell silent. Even Judge Campbell, known for her stern authority, paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Just as the bailiff stepped forward to usher the dog out, it let out a single sharp bark. Heads turned, and the bailiff hesitated. The dog barked again, louder this time, its gaze fixed on the defendant. A ripple of unease spread through the courtroom. Whispers began to circulate. What was a dog doing here, and why was it barking? Before anyone could act, the dog barked a 3rd time, each sound echoing like a command. Then it sat, its tail wagging faintly, as if signaling its work was done. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between the dog and the judge. Judge Campbell raised her gavel to regain control of the room, but before she could speak, the bailiff gasped and pointed at the dog's collar. A tiny key dangled from it, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. The courtroom froze. What was this key, and why did the dog seem so intent on being here? In this moment, the atmosphere crackled with suspense as everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Judge Martha Campbell's eyes remained fixed on the stray dog sitting confidently in the middle of the courtroom. The key dangling from its collar caught the light, reflecting onto the faces of the curious crowd. For the first time in her long career, Judge Campbell was at a loss for words. She leaned slightly forward, her usually steady hands gripping the edge of her desk. "Bailiff, secure the dog," she finally commanded, her voice breaking the stunned silence. The bailiff hesitated for a moment, then approached the dog cautiously. The stray didn't move, its gaze remained locked on the defendant, David Hollis, the wealthy businessman accused of embezzling millions from local charities. Hollis squirmed in his chair, his polished exterior showing cracks as the dog's presence unsettled him. "What's going on here?" the defense attorney barked, rising from his seat. "This is highly irregular. Remove the animal immediately." The prosecutor remained silent, watching the scene unfold with interest. Prosecutor Elaine Morgan, known for her sharp instincts, narrowed her eyes at the defendant. She noticed his unease and whispered to her assistant, "He's nervous. Why?" Meanwhile, the bailiff reached the stray, kneeling to inspect its collar. The dog allowed it, sitting still as if it understood the gravity of the situation. The bailiff unhooked the small rusted key and held it up for the judge to see. "Your Honor, this key was attached to the dog's collar," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "A key?" Judge Campbell asked, her brow furrowing. "What does it unlock?" Before anyone could answer, the dog stood up and began walking towards the defense table, its movements deliberate and purposeful. Gasps rippled through the crowd as it stopped directly in front of Hollis, sitting again and letting out a soft growl. Hollis recoiled, his face pale, his hands gripping the table tightly. "Is this some kind of stunt?" Hollis's lawyer demanded, his voice rising in anger. "Your Honor, this is an outrageous disruption." Judge Campbell raised a hand to silence him. "Enough," she said, her tone cutting through the tension. "Bailiff, secure the dog and take it to the side for now. Let's get back to—" "Wait," Prosecutor Morgan interrupted, rising from her seat. "Your Honor, may I inspect that key? This may be relevant to the case." Judge Campbell hesitated but nodded. The bailiff handed the key to Morgan, who examined it closely. Her sharp eyes widened slightly as she turned it over in her hands. The rusty metal bore a faint marking, an emblem she recognized from the evidence file. "This emblem," Morgan said, holding up the key for the courtroom to see, "matches the logo of a private storage facility in town, a facility that's tied to Mr. Hollis." The murmurs erupted. Hollis's lawyer protested loudly, but Judge Campbell banged her gavel to restore order. "Quiet. Prosecutor Morgan, continue." Morgan stepped forward, her voice steady and confident. "Your Honor, we've been investigating Mr. Hollis for months. We believe he used a storage unit under a fake name to hide critical evidence, documents that would prove his embezzlement. This key might lead us to that evidence." The crowd buzzed with excitement and shock. But, Judge Campbell remained composed. "Do you have enough to request a search warrant for this storage facility?" "Yes, Your Honor," Morgan replied, holding up a prepared motion. "Given this new development, I believe we have probable cause to search the facility immediately." Hollis's lawyer slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. You can't base a warrant on the actions of a stray dog. This entire proceeding is turning into a circus." Judge Campbell fixed him with a steely glare. "Mr. Carter, if your client has nothing to hide, then he has nothing to worry about. Prosecutor Morgan, your motion is granted. Bailiff, escort the prosecutor to ensure the warrant is executed without delay." The bailiff nodded and quickly exited the courtroom with Morgan, the key clutched tightly in her hand. The dog, still sitting near Hollis, watched them leave, its tail wagging faintly as if satisfied with the turn of events. Hollis's face had gone from pale to ashen, and he whispered furiously to his lawyer, who struggled to maintain his composure. Back in the courtroom, Judge Campbell addressed the audience. "We will adjourn until further notice. Bailiff, ensure the dog is taken care of and kept safe. This situation is unprecedented, but we must follow where the evidence leads." As the room began to clear, whispers filled the air. Who was this dog? How had it known to bring the key, and what would they find in the storage unit? Judge Campbell remained at her bench, watching as the dog was gently led out of the room. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of intrigue she hadn't experienced since her early days on the bench. This was no ordinary case, and the dog was no ordinary witness. The courtroom emptied, but the mystery deepened. What secrets did the storage unit hold, and why had this stray dog become the catalyst for exposing them? The next chapter of this extraordinary case was about to unfold. Outside the courtroom, the tension was palpable as Prosecutor Elaine Morgan and the bailiff sped toward the storage facility. The rusty key clutched in her hand felt heavier with every passing moment, as if it carried the weight of the truth they were about to uncover. The stray dog's inexplicable actions played on her mind. What were the odds that this animal, of all creatures, would bring them the break they desperately needed? Back in the courtroom, Judge Campbell lingered in her chambers, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to this case than met the eye. Her mind wandered to the defendant, David Hollis, whose sudden discomfort at the dog's appearance hadn't gone unnoticed. There was something unsettling about his reaction, something more than mere annoyance at the disruption. Meanwhile, Hollis sat with his lawyer in a private meeting room. His calm facade crumbled under the pressure. "This can't be happening," he muttered, pacing the floor. "How did they even know about the storage unit?" His lawyer, Carter, tried to reassure him. "We don't know what they'll find. For all we know, that key could be meaningless." But Hollis wasn't convinced. He stopped pacing and stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "If they find those documents, it's over." At the storage facility, Morgan and the bailiff arrived with the warrant in hand. The facility manager, a wiry man in his 60s, looked confused as they explained their purpose. "You're saying this key came from a dog?" he asked incredulously. Morgan nodded, her tone firm. "Yes, and we believe it opens one of the units here. Please, we need your cooperation." The manager shrugged and led them to the unit matching the serial number etched on the key. The air was thick with anticipation as Morgan inserted the key into the lock. It clicked open with surprising ease, revealing a dark interior. The bailiff flicked on a flashlight, and the beam illuminated rows of file boxes stacked neatly inside. Morgan stepped forward, her heart pounding. She opened the nearest box, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside were documents, ledgers, contracts, and receipts, all meticulously organized. Each piece of paper seemed to tell a damning story of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. "This is it," Morgan whispered. "We've got him." As word of the discovery reached the courtroom, chaos erupted. Reporters scrambled to update their stories, and whispers filled the air as the news spread. Hollis's lawyer demanded a recess, but the judge denied the request. "We will proceed as planned," Judge Campbell announced, her voice resolute. "If the evidence is admissible, it will be presented." Hollis, visibly sweating, leaned over to Carter. "You need to stop this," he hissed. "There's got to be a way to discredit that evidence." But Carter shook his head, his confidence waning. The key came directly from the dog, Hollis. This isn't something we can argue away. Meanwhile, the dog, temporarily placed in the care of a local animal shelter, rested peacefully. The shelter staff couldn't help but marvel at the animal's calm demeanor. "Plants like he knows. He's done something important," one of the workers remarked, scratching behind the dog's ears. They decided to name him Justice, a fitting tribute to his unexpected heroism. As Morgan returned to the courtroom with boxes of evidence in tow, she was met with a standing-room-only crowd. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as she presented the first batch of documents. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Judge Campbell, "these records confirm that Mr. Hollis has been siphoning funds from multiple charities into offshore accounts. The transactions are detailed and traceable. This key," she held it up for emphasis, "was the missing link." The defense scrambled to object, but Judge Campbell waved them off. "Let her finish." Morgan continued, her voice steady and deliberate. "We believe these funds were meant for underprivileged children, medical research, and community housing projects. Instead, they were funneled into accounts owned by Mr. Hollis under various aliases." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Hollis's pale face turned red, then white again as the reality of the situation hit him. The once confident businessman now looked like a cornered animal. As the day's proceedings came to a close, Judge Campbell addressed the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented today, this court has sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Mr. Hollis, you are remanded into custody until further notice." The gavel struck, and the room erupted. Reporters rushed to file their stories, spectators whispered in disbelief, and the prosecution exchanged quiet nods of satisfaction. But for all the commotion, one question lingered in everyone's mind: how had the dog known to intervene? Outside the courtroom, Morgan paused to take a breath. She looked up at the gray sky, the weight of the day finally settling on her shoulders. As she walked to her car, she couldn't stop thinking about Justice, the dog that had turned the case on its head. "Sometimes," she murmured to herself, "the universe works in mysterious ways." The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case progressed, but the story was far from over. Prosecutor Elaine Morgan, now equipped with damning evidence, knew she had the upper hand. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery of the stray dog was still unresolved. How had the animal acquired the key, and why had it appeared at such a critical moment? These questions lingered in her mind as the trial was adjourned for the day. Later that evening, as Morgan returned to her office, a call came in from the local animal shelter. The staff member on the line sounded excited. "Miss Morgan, we think you should see something. It's about the dog, Justice. There's something you need to know." Intrigued, Morgan headed to the shelter. When she arrived, Justice greeted her with a wagging tail, his eyes warm and intelligent. The shelter worker, a young woman named Carla, handed Morgan a faded dog tag. "We didn't notice it earlier, but Justice had this tucked under his collar, hidden beneath the key. It looks like a name tag." Morgan examined the tag closely. The engraving was worn, but she could still make out the name Max and an address on the outskirts of town. Her curiosity piqued, she decided to visit the address the next morning. The following day, Morgan arrived at the address listed on the tag, a small, run-down farmhouse surrounded by overgrown grass. She knocked on the door, and an elderly man answered, his face lighting up when he saw the tag in her hand. "Max," the man exclaimed, tears welling up in his eyes. "You found my Max." Morgan explained the situation, telling the man about the dog's heroic actions in the courtroom. The man introduced himself as Henry, a retired locksmith who had lived alone for years. He recounted how Max, his loyal German shepherd, had gone missing months ago during a storm. "I thought I'd lost him forever," Henry said, his voice trembling. "He's more than just a dog to me. He's my family." Morgan asked Henry if he recognized the key that had been attached to Max's collar. Henry squinted at it, his expression shifting from joy to confusion. "That's one of my old keys," he said slowly. "Yeah, I used to make spare keys for people around town, but this one belongs to David Hollis." Morgan froze. "David Hollis, the defendant in our case?" Henry nodded, his brow furrowed. "Yes, years ago, Hollis hired me to make keys for a private storage unit he owned. He said it was for business, but he paid me extra to keep quiet about it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but is this related to the trial?" Morgan's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Max must have stumbled upon the storage unit while wandering the town, finding the key and bringing it to the courtroom by some incredible stroke of fate or instinct. The connection between Henry, Hollis, and the key was too significant to ignore. "Henry," Morgan said, her tone serious, "you might have just uncovered the missing link in our case. I need you to come with me to the courthouse and provide a statement." Back in the courtroom, the trial resumed with heightened anticipation. Hollis, now visibly anxious, glanced nervously at his lawyer as Morgan prepared to present her latest findings. She introduced Henry to the court, explaining his connection to both the key and the defendant. "Your Honor," Morgan began, addressing Judge Campbell, "this is Henry Dawson, a retired locksmith who worked for Mr. Hollis several years ago. He has confirmed that the key brought to us by the stray dog, Justice, was made for a private storage unit owned by the defendant." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hollis's lawyer immediately objected, claiming hearsay, but Judge Campbell overruled him. "Let the witness speak," she said firmly. Henry took the stand, recounting his story with surprising clarity for his age. He detailed how Hollis had hired him under suspicious circumstances, paying him extra to remain silent. "I didn't know what he was hiding in that unit," Henry concluded, "but I knew it wasn't above board." Morgan then presented additional evidence from the storage unit, documents that directly tied Hollis to the embezzlement scheme. These records, combined with Mr. Dawson's testimony, establish a clear link between the defendant and the illegal activities we've uncovered, she said. Hollis's lawyer attempted to poke holes in the testimony, but the damage was done. The jury members exchanged knowing glances, their skepticism toward Hollis growing by the minute. As the court adjourned for the day, Morgan couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. The case was unraveling in her favor, and Justice, the stray dog, had proven to be an unlikely hero. Yet the mystery of how Max had ended up with the key still gnawed at her. Was it pure coincidence, or was there more to the story? That evening, Morgan visited the animal shelter once more. As she sat with Justice, scratching behind his ears, she reflected on the incredible chain of events that had brought them to this point. "You're more than just a dog, aren't you?" she murmured. Justice wagged his tail, his intelligent eyes meeting hers as if to say, "You'll see." The courtroom was abuzz the following morning as the trial resumed. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The revelation about the key and its connection to the defendant had shifted the case dramatically, leaving David Hollis and his legal team visibly shaken. Judge Martha Campbell entered the room, her usual calm demeanor masking the curiosity swirling in her mind about how a stray dog had appended an intricate case. Prosecutor Elaine Morgan sat at her desk, reviewing her notes while occasionally glancing toward the back of the courtroom where Henry Dawson had taken a seat. The retired locksmith had become an unexpected linchpin in the case, his testimony adding credibility to the prosecution's narrative. Beside him, Max, now affectionately nicknamed Justice, sat quietly, his presence earning him admiring smiles from everyone who noticed him. The defense team, however, was anything but composed. Hollis's lawyer, Carter, paced back and forth, clearly struggling to salvage his client's crumbling defense. Hollis himself sat rigidly in his chair, his hands clenched into fists. The pressure was mounting, and the cracks in his confident exterior were becoming impossible to ignore. As the proceedings began, Judge Campbell addressed the court. "We've reached a pivotal point in this trial. The evidence presented yesterday has raised significant questions about the defendant's actions and intent. Prosecutor Morgan, please proceed with your next witness." Morgan stood and approached the bench with calm confidence. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Officer Rachel Torres to the stand." Officer Torres had been investigating reports of suspicious activity linked to the defendant's storage unit. Torres took the stand, her uniform crisp and her expression serious. She detailed the results of her investigation, describing how the storage unit had been under surveillance for months due to complaints of unusual deliveries and nighttime activity. "We suspected the unit was being used for illicit purposes," she explained. "However, we lacked the evidence to obtain a warrant, until now." Morgan nodded. "And during your surveillance, did you observe anything or anyone that could connect this unit directly to Mr. Hollis?" "Yes," Torres replied. "We documented multiple visits by Mr. Hollis's vehicle. He often arrived late at night and stayed for extended periods. Our logs show that he made these visits regularly over the past year." The courtroom murmured as Morgan displayed time-stamped photographs of Hollis's car parked outside the storage facility. "Your Honor, these images further corroborate Mr. Dawson's testimony and the documents retrieved from the storage unit." Judge Campbell leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" Carter stood, his expression tight. "Yes, Your Honor." He approached Torres, attempting to cast doubt on her testimony. Officer Torres, are you absolutely certain that these visits were made by my client and not someone else using his vehicle? Torres didn't flinch. Yes, sir. In addition to visual confirmation, we also matched the vehicle's license plate to Mr. Hollis. There's no doubt it was him. Carter pressed on, but his efforts to discredit the evidence fell flat. The jurors' expressions made it clear that they weren't buying his arguments. Hollis meanwhile looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. As the day wore on, Morgan decided to revisit the role of justice in the case. During a recess, she approached Judge Campbell with an unusual request. Your Honor, I'd like to formally introduce Justice as a key figure in this trial. His actions directly led to the discovery of the evidence against Mr. Hollis, and I believe his presence could provide valuable insight into the timeline of events. Judge Campbell raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we call the dog to the stand, Miss Morgan? Morgan chuckled softly. Not quite, Your Honor. But I do believe the jury deserves to understand the full context of how this evidence came to light. Justice's role in this case is unprecedented, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. After a moment's consideration, Judge Campbell nodded. Very well. You may proceed. When the trial resumed, Morgan addressed the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment to discuss how this key and the evidence it led us to came into our possession. It was brought to us by this remarkable dog, Justice. She gestured toward the back of the room, where Justice sat proudly beside Henry. The dog's ears perked up as the attention of the entire courtroom turned to him. Justice's actions might seem extraordinary, even unbelievable, Morgan continued. But they highlight an important truth. Sometimes, the most unlikely heroes can bring justice to light. His instincts, his determination, these are qualities we often associate with loyalty and integrity. And in this case, they've proven invaluable. The jury members nodded, their expressions softening as they looked at the dog. Even Judge Campbell couldn't hide a faint smile. Meanwhile, Hollis's composure was rapidly deteriorating. He leaned toward Carter, his voice low but frantic. We need to do something. This can't go on. Carter shook his head. There's nothing we can do. The evidence is airtight, and the jury is already against us. Hollis clenched his fists, his face reddening with anger. This isn't over, he hissed. As the day's proceedings came to a close, the jury was visibly moved by the narrative of Justice's role in the case. Morgan felt a renewed sense of determination. The case was no longer just about exposing Hollis's crimes, it was about proving that truth and integrity, no matter how unlikely the source, could prevail. As the trial progressed, the courtroom buzzed with speculation and curiosity about the stray dog's remarkable role in the case. While the public and jury grew more fascinated by Justice, Hollis's defense team was working frantically behind the scenes, trying to devise a strategy to discredit the evidence and regain control of the narrative. That evening, Elaine Morgan returned to her office, exhausted but focused. As she reviewed the case files, her phone buzzed. It was an email from a journalist who had been covering the trial. The subject line read, *anonymous tip regarding Justice and Hollis connection. Intrigued, Morgan opened the email. The message was brief but shocking. Justice was no stray. He was trained by Hollis years ago for private security on his estate. Investigate further, you'll find more than you expect. The sender remained anonymous, but the claim left Morgan reeling. Could it be true? Could Justice have once belonged to the very man he helped expose? The possibility raised a troubling question. If Justice had a prior connection to Hollis, was his behavior truly instinctual, or was there a deeper story yet to be uncovered? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Morgan decided to visit Henry Dawson again. If anyone knew the truth about Justice's past, it would be the retired locksmith who had cared for him before the trial began. The next morning, Morgan arrived at Henry's farmhouse, where Justice greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. Henry invited her inside, offering her a cup of tea as she explained her concerns. Henry, I received some information that Justice might have been connected to David Hollis before this case. Do you know anything about that? Henry frowned, his face clouded with thought. It's possible, he admitted. When I found Max, Justice, he was wandering near the edge of town. He looked well-fed, like he'd been cared for recently, but there was no collar, no ID other than the tag with my address. I always thought it was odd that a dog like him would be abandoned. Morgan's mind raced. And you didn't recognize the key on his collar? Henry shook his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it was from a random job I'd done years ago. But now that I think about it, I did some work for Hollis in the past, and he did have a security team with trained dogs. The pieces were beginning to fit together. If Justice had indeed been one of Hollis's trained security dogs, then his presence in the courtroom wasn't just a coincidence, it was fate. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Hollis was growing increasingly desperate. During a recess, he cornered his lawyer, Carter, in the hallway. "We need to take control of this story," he snapped. "If they dig too deep into Justice's past, they'll find out things I can't afford to have exposed." Carter, visibly frustrated, threw up his hands. "There's no way to stop this train, David. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the jury is already swayed by the dog's actions. Unless you have a miracle up your sleeve, there's nothing I can do." Hollis's eyes darkened, a dangerous glint flashing across his face. "If they're going to dig into Justice, maybe we should give them something else to focus on." The following day, a shocking development disrupted the trial. A video surfaced online, allegedly showing Justice in a previous altercation with a man at a construction site. The footage, grainy but clear enough to identify the dog, appeared to depict Justice lunging aggressively at the man, who was later revealed to be one of Hollis's former employees. The defense wasted no time seizing the opportunity. Carter presented the video in court, claiming it as evidence that Justice was an unpredictable animal with a history of aggression. "For Your Honor," Carter argued, "this video raises serious questions about the credibility of this dog's behavior and whether he can be trusted as the so-called hero of this case." The jury exchanged uneasy glances, and even Judge Campbell seemed momentarily taken aback. Morgan, however, remained composed. She asked for a brief recess to investigate the validity of the video. During the break, Morgan worked tirelessly with her team to verify the footage. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. The video had been heavily edited to paint Justice in a negative light. The original footage, sourced from a security camera, revealed the full context. Justice had been defending a child who had wandered into the construction site, placing himself between the child and a piece of falling debris. Morgan wasted no time presenting her findings in court. "Your Honor, the defense has presented a misleading video in an attempt to tarnish Justice's reputation," she declared. She played the unedited video for the courtroom, and the mood shifted immediately. Gasps filled the room as the jury saw Justice risking his own safety to save the child. The tide had turned once again, and Hollis's attempt to undermine the dog's role had backfired spectacularly. As the day drew to a close, Morgan reflected on the challenges that had arisen and the resilience of the truth. Justice had proven time and time again that his instincts were pure and his actions driven by a sense of loyalty and protection. For Morgan, the case had become more than just a fight for justice. It was a testament to the bond between humans and animals and the extraordinary ways in which that bond could change lives. The following day, the courtroom was alive with tension. Hollis's attempt to discredit Justice had backfired, but the ripple effects lingered. The jury appeared to be grappling with the emotional weight of the case, now layered with the dog's extraordinary story and the defendant's mounting desperation. Prosecutor Elaine Morgan took her place at the bench, her confidence tempered by the growing complexity of the trial. She knew she needed to maintain focus and keep the jury's trust, especially as Hollis's defense team became increasingly unpredictable. As the trial resumed, Morgan called Henry Dawson to the stand. The retired locksmith shuffled forward, adjusting his glasses nervously as he prepared to testify about how justice had come into his life and ultimately how he had led them to the evidence. The courtroom quieted as Morgan began her questioning. "Mr. Dawson," Morgan said, her voice calm and steady, "can you describe how you first encountered Justice?" Henry cleared his throat. "Well, it was a stormy night, and I heard scratching at my back door. When I opened it, there he was, wet, shivering, and looking like he'd been wandering for miles. I couldn't turn him away." Morgan nodded. "And did you notice anything unusual about him?" Henry adjusted his glasses again. "Yes, he had a collar with a key attached to it. At first, I didn't think much of it, figured it might belong to his previous owner. But then I recognized the shape of the key. It was one of mine." The jury leaned in, captivated. Morgan pressed on. "And when you examined the key, what did you discover?" "I realized it was a custom design I'd made years ago for a secure storage unit. I never expected it to resurface like this, especially on a dog's collar." Morgan turned to the jury. "So this key, which ultimately led us to evidence tied directly to the defendant, was brought to you by Justice, a stray dog who appeared on your doorstep. Is that correct?" Henry nodded. "Yes, As Morgan stepped back, Carter rose to cross-examine Henry. His tone was sharp, his questions designed to sow doubt. "Mr. Dawson, isn't it possible that this dog could have come from anywhere, that the key might not even be connected to my client?" Henry frowned, his hands tightening around the edges of the witness stand. "I suppose it's possible." Carter interrupted, his voice rising. "You're not certain, are you? You can't definitively prove that this dog has any connection to my client." Morgan objected, and Judge Campbell upheld it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The jury exchanged uncertain glances, and Morgan felt the delicate balance of the case shift once more. During the lunch recess, Morgan sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, her thoughts racing. She knew the defense was exploiting the emotional weight of the trial, trying to manipulate the jury's perception of justice's role. She needed a strategy to refocus the narrative and remind the jury of the undeniable facts. As she sipped her coffee, Henry approached her table, Justice trotting loyally at his side. "Miss Morgan," Henry said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what Carter said. Maybe he's right. Maybe there's no way to prove where justice came from." Morgan shook her head. "Don't let him get to you, Henry. The evidence speaks for itself. Justice led us to the key, and the key led us to the truth. That's what matters." Henry sighed, reaching down to scratch Justice behind the ears. "He's a good dog, Miss Morgan. I just hope the jury sees that." Back in the courtroom, the tension continued to build. Morgan decided it was time to address the emotional undercurrents head-on. She called Dr. Sarah Bennett, an animal behaviorist, to the stand. Dr. Bennett's testimony aimed to highlight Justice's unique instincts and behaviors, offering a scientific perspective on his actions. "Dr. Bennett," Morgan began, "can you explain what might drive a dog like Justice to act in the way he did?" Dr. Bennett smiled warmly. "Dogs are incredibly perceptive creatures. They form strong bonds with humans and are often driven by loyalty and a desire to protect. In Justice's case, his actions suggest a remarkable level of intelligence and intuition." Morgan nodded. "Would you say that Justice's behavior aligns with that of a dog who might have been trained in the past?" "It's highly likely," Dr. Bennett replied. "His ability to retrieve the key and bring it to Mr. Dawson suggests a history of training, possibly in security or protection." Morgan turned to the jury. "So even if Justice's past remains a mystery, his instincts and actions in this case were extraordinary. Would you agree, Dr. Bennett?" "Absolutely," she said. "Justice's behavior demonstrates not only intelligence but also an unshakable sense of loyalty." The jury seemed moved by Dr. Bennett's testimony, but the defense wasn't finished. Carter stood, his expression grim. "Dr. Bennett," he began, "isn't it true that dogs, no matter how well trained, can act unpredictably?" Dr. Bennett tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's true to an extent. But in my experience, a dog's actions are often reflective of their environment and upbringing. Justice's behavior in this case suggests a history of care and training, not unpredictability." Carter pressed further, but Dr. Bennett's calm, authoritative demeanor held firm. The jury's faith in justice was beginning to solidify once more. By the end of the day, Morgan felt a renewed sense of hope. Despite the defense's attempts to undermine the case, the truth was holding strong. Justice's presence in the courtroom continued to serve as a powerful reminder of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, a bond that could defy logic and bring light to the darkest of situations. The courtroom seemed to pulse with tension as the trial progressed. Each new development pulled the jury deeper into the complex web of events, and Prosecutor Morgan knew that she needed to keep the momentum in her favor. However, an unexpected twist was about to escalate the stakes even further. The morning session began with a surprising announcement from Hollis's defense team. Carter approached the bench with a folder in hand, his expression grim but determined. "Your Honor," he began, addressing Judge Campbell, "the defense has obtained new evidence that we believe is critical to this case. It directly pertains to the prosecution's reliance on the dog, Justice." Morgan stiffened, her gaze fixed on Carter. "What is this evidence?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. Carter opened the folder and handed a document to the judge. "We've obtained records suggesting that Justice, real name Max, was once part of a specialized K-9 training program for private security. These records indicate that he was trained specifically to retrieve objects, and that his presence at the crime scene may not have been as coincidental as the prosecution claims." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued by this new revelation. Morgan, however, refused to be rattled. She quickly requested a recess to review the documents and prepare a rebuttal. During the recess, Morgan pored over the documents with her team. The records appeared legitimate, detailing Justice's enrollment in a private K-9 training facility and his subsequent deployment to a security firm owned by none other than David Hollis. The revelation was shocking but not entirely unexpected. Morgan turned to her assistant, a young paralegal named Ava, who had been instrumental in gathering evidence for the case. "We need to verify the authenticity of these records and find out why Hollis's team waited until now to bring this forward," Morgan said. Ava nodded, her fingers already flying over her laptop keyboard. "On it. If the records are real, there has to be more to the story." Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the jury's perception of justice was beginning to shift. The defense's revelation planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that the dog's actions might have been orchestrated or influenced by prior training. Carter seized the opportunity to cast further doubt, calling a former trainer from the K-9 facility to testify. The trainer, a gruff man named Martin Hayes, took the stand with a confident demeanor. "Yes, I remember Max," he said when asked about Justice. "He was one of the best dogs we ever trained, sharp, obedient, and incredibly loyal." Carter leaned forward, his tone measured. "Mr. Hayes, could you describe the kind of training Max received?" "Of course," Hayes replied. "He was trained in retrieval, tracking, and object recognition. If you gave him a command, he'd follow it without hesitation." Carter smiled faintly, turning to the jury. "So it's fair to say that Max's ability to find and retrieve the key was a result of his training, not some miraculous instinct." Eyes hesitated, glancing at Justice, who was lying quietly at Henry Dawson's feet. "I suppose you could say that," he admitted, though his voice lacked conviction. When Morgan took her turn to cross-examine Hayes, she focused on the gaps in his testimony. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "you mentioned that Justice, Max, was trained at your facility. Can you confirm whether he was still under your care or Hollis's employ at the time of the events in question?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably.